Hello and welcome to our Q&A event, everyone. We have titled this event today, Everything You Want to Know About Military Voting. So I hope military-connected folks in the audience are ready to ask lots of questions today. Today's event is brought to you by the Military Vote Coalition. We are a nonpartisan group of 23 military and veteran family support organizations who work together to defend our community's access to the ballot box and advance it. You can check out our website for more details about what the coalition's all about at www.militaryvotecoalition.org. My name is Sarah Strader. I'm the Executive Director of Secure Families Initiative, which is one of the coalition partners. And I am joined by two lovely co-moderators today, Bessa and Rebecca. Would you like to introduce yourselves?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having us here with you today, and welcome to everyone who's joining us over their lunch hour. I'm Bessa Pinchotti. I'm the Executive Director and CEO of the National Military Family Association. We are excited to be here today. We're excited to be a part of the coalition. And on a personal note, this is such an issue that's near and dear to my heart because growing up the daughter of an immigrant, voting was one of the most important parts of our lives. I've been going to the polls with my dad since I could barely even walk. So I'm thrilled to be here today. And I'm hoping that we can inspire others to jump through some of these hoops and make sure that you're voting as well.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Emerson from Exceptional Families of the Military. I'm the Executive Director. I'm also very excited to be here today. Our organization supports military families with special needs, and we're really looking to spread information about how to vote and how to advocate for yourself, especially within the disability sector.
And NMFA, EFM, and SFI are but 3 of the 23 organizations who do this coalition. So like I said, check out our website for more details. But we're just so thrilled to have these awesome co-moderators. And we are joined by a resident expert. So the goal of today's Q&A is for all of us on this community side to be able to feed questions we've got to the people who know the answers. And that is the Federal Voting Assistance Program, or FVAP. Today, we have Clarissa Rodriguez, who has agreed to join our chat. And can I just say, folks, Clarissa is a champ. We originally had a different FF expert online to join, but we had some tech issues. And so Clarissa is tag teaming it in. I have no doubt that she will still have all the answers that we need, but just want to commend Clarissa for being on board for that. So thank you.
Thanks, Sarah.
So here's how today's event is going to go. Our coalition has gathered a few questions in advance. So Bessa, Rebecca, and I are going to take turns asking Clarissa for her wisdom on these questions. But meanwhile, I really want to encourage anyone who's in the audience right now watching this video, strongly encourage you to ask any registration voter ballot questions you might have in the comments of this video. We do have some team members who are going to be monitoring that feed. And then at some point, we're going to switch gears. We're going to go from the pre-prepared questions to asking live questions from our audience. So start sticking them there so we can start getting them in the queue. Sound good? And with that, I think Bessa has our first prepared question.
Yes, I do. We're starting with a Mythbusters type question. What is the most common misunderstanding that you hear from military voters about the voting process? Let's correct it right here.
So the most common question and confusion that we encounter when we assist military voters and military spouses is the issue about the voting residence. So what is the voting residence for a military voter who is very mobile? You know, it's very common for the military community to PCS or to change their duty stations frequently. And so at some point, there might be 2 or 3 addresses where the voters have lived before. So what we encourage voters to do is to review their documentation, and usually their voting residence will be the same address as that on their LES or leave and earnings statement. That helps keep everything in one order in one place. And of course, this is the voter's legal address and physical address. It cannot be a PO box, and it cannot be, it must be a physical address. And so wherever that service member last established residency and considers his or her legal address, then that is the same voting address. And if they want to change that, eventually when they PCS to a new state, for example, then they can do so, but they must ensure to communicate that to their election office. And the way to do that is by filling out the federal postcard application. And this FPCA is a 2-in-1 because it not only allows service members to register to vote, but it also helps them request their ballot and update their contact information. So this FPCA is critical. It's the first step in the process. And in section 2 of that FPCA, that is where the service member can include that voting residence.
Thank you, Clarissa. I remember that being one of the first things I learned the hard way when we started getting in this process. So I'm really glad you started with that. And I'm going to quickly flag that it looks like Lisa from FF is also going to be available to join this stream. So Lisa, I am going to add you. Hello, Lisa. Welcome. We're so glad you're here.
Thank you. I apologize. I was having technical difficulties, but I am currently here and glad to join the group. Thank you.
Better late than never. We're delighted to have you. Clarissa, I'll kind of give you permission if you want to also stay on screen or if you want to hop off, it's totally up to you. All right. With that, Rebecca, I think you've got the next question.
Yes. When it comes to mail-in voting, if the voter has a disability that makes it difficult to access the mail ballots, like maybe with sight, what options are available to them?
Who's answering? Am I answering or is Clarissa? I am?
Go ahead, Lisa. Yeah.
For sure. So that's a very good question. So if the voter is located in the United States, voting, it's a law that disability programs have to be convenient for all personnel accessing the voting poll. So they would have lower kiosks for persons in wheelchairs. And they do also offer curbside assistance where an attendant would come out and they would vote from their car using the same capabilities as inside, just from their cars. So overseas, election officials are not they're not prone to the same things there. So most of them are voting ballots through the mail. So if there's visibility problems that occurs, then what they would do is alert their election official of their accommodations that are needed, and they can apply that information on their FPCA when they're submitting that in block number 6, identifying their disability so they can be accommodated once they receive their ballots.
That's excellent. So there are forms of recourse in both channels, whether it's an absentee ballot, communicating early to your election official when accommodation is needed, and in-person voting. There are accommodation availabilities for in-person polling places.
Absolutely.
Wonderful, wonderful. I've got the next question. Back to that international mail-in ballot voting that you mentioned, Lisa.
Mm-hmm.
International mail delays were a big problem in 2020. No shock to anyone here, right? Thank you, COVID. Probably some other things happening too. And what we know is that based on what we've read, it has the potential to continue to be a problem even into this year. And so what we would like to hear from either or both of you is what your best advice is for a voter who might be overseas about how they can navigate international mail delivery days. How do they warn themselves against that risk?
Sure. So we recommend vote as soon as possible. The earliest, the best. Voters need to review the COVID page that we have listed on the fap.gov website. It has a link to United States Postal Service. There, the voters, they can find helpful information about the international mail delays. Clarissa, she will post the link in the chat box for everyone to have access to as well. If you're having access to a military installation, those mails are not delayed. Those mails go through the United States Postal Service directly. But if you're using the embassy or the consulates to deliver your FPCA or your FWAB or your state ballot, you're encouraged to do it early. because they too may be affected through the national or the regular channels. And we discourage everyone to try to not to use the other options of delivery, FedEx, and those type, because they become very expensive and those expenses come out of pocket. So we encourage you to try to vote early to mitigate the delay, to ensure that your election official receive your FPC and or state ballot in a timely manner.
And then just to add on to what Lisa, to the information that Lisa provided, there are several states and territories in the District of Columbia that accept voting materials electronically. And so all service members and military spouses can send in the completed signed FPCA, and in section 5, they can indicate how they want to receive their ballot. We encourage these voters to select to receive their ballots by email. That is the fastest way for them to receive their voting materials electronically. That means that 45 days before the scheduled election, those voters will receive their voting materials, including their ballot, and that gives them a month and a half to return their ballot. And just like Lisa said, many states accept the ballot by mail only. So in those cases, voters need to start early and make a plan. There are other states and territories and DC that accept ballots by email or by fax. Those are electronic options. And so to find out if the state or territory or DC offers this accessibility, then voters can check our state-specific guidelines at fvap.gov. So if there's an opportunity to send in voting materials electronically, then we really support that and we encourage that to offset mailing delays.
Thank you both. And I really just want to emphasize something that Clarissa brought up. Y'all, when you're a military absentee voter, you get these rights that are so crucial and awesome. One of them is that 45-day in advance deadline. That is federal law, that your election office has to send you your ballot at least that far in advance. That is awesome. We have that thanks to the history of policy changes that have made that possible. And then Clarissa mentioned also that no matter what state you vote in, you can receive your ballot electronically. That is universal standard. Now, if your specific state requires you to submit it by mail, you got to have a printer to be able to print it out. So fingers crossed you have a printer or you have access to a printer at your base installation somewhere. But again, having that kind of universal standard across the board when so much else that's election related is like state by state, we just really think that's awesome. And I want to make sure to double underline that. So thanks so much for mentioning that.
Yeah, there's been so much progress over the years, making things just a little bit easier. So we absolutely need to take advantage of that. Vote early, use electronic options. I have another question. So we've talked a lot about having to mail in, maybe because you are overseas right now, or maybe you're a military family in a new community, because we all know, some even more than others, that we move every 2 to 3 years as military families. So sometimes you may have gone to the polls and been like, who are these people and what are these issues? And that's never how you want to feel. What can you do to really get in tune, be in the know of what's happening in the community where you're voting?
So because I do work a little bit more with social media and our outreach, Lisa, I can take this question. So with voters and especially military members who are now located in a completely different environment, a completely different installation, for example, where they vote is where they will send their ballots. Their ballots will not come to a specific FVAP organization. Their ballots will go directly to their election offices in the county where they are registered to vote. And in order to find out what is on that ballot, then voters can go to their Secretary of State's websites to preview the sample ballot in order to find out who the candidates are so that the voter can then do the research. This independent research can be done a myriad of ways. Voters can look up their candidates. Some candidates have websites, for example. And so the voter really needs to sit down and really categorize who their preferred candidates are, as well as ballot initiatives. There are so many propositions and other offices that will be on their ballots. And so we encourage voters to do their research beforehand so that when they do go to their local polling place on election day, if they are currently in their in the county where they are registered to vote, then they can take those notes with them. They can take that list, or they could print out a sample ballot already filled out so that they can copy what research they have onto their official ballot. So that would be a recommendation for voters who go in person to vote. And the same can actually be said for military voters and military spouses who are deployed currently. We know that there are a lot of deployments going to Europe now as a result of certain situations. And so with these individuals, voting might not be the first thing that they think of when they wake up that day. But that's why we try to instill this message that be voter ready so that you are good to go and you can focus on the mission. So if a voter registers to vote, if a military member submits their FPCA and has all of their voting materials in order, then they will receive a ballot and they'll be able to look up their candidates and return that ballot immediately so that they can return to whatever responsibilities they might have to ensure that the mission is a success. So it's a lot of personal responsibility, but that falls not only on military voters, but also on us civilians.
Mm-hmm. Hi, I have another question for you. So I recently transitioned out of the military. So my role changed a little bit from active duty service member to active duty service member spouse. And I just wanted to ask a question about, the complications for voting. So I did have kind of a confusing time. What do I do? Where do I go? Because I had a static state for a long time. And then all of a sudden I'm a spouse. Do I vote in the state where my husband's a resident? Do I vote in the state that we live in? I was wondering if you could shed some light on that transition for military members.
I could take that, Clarissa. So yeah, perfect. So I too was a transitioning service member prior to FF. I was actually the installation voting assistant officer at Fort Sill in Oklahoma. And that's where I first began managing voting programs that informed service members about their voting assistance. And then later transitioned into voting myself outside of the military. So it's not very much different than being a URCAVA voter, except as a civilian or a military spouse, you fall under the Eligible Family Members Military Spouse Residency Resilience Act. And that provides you the rights to vote. So you have several options to vote as a military spouse. So you would keep the voting residence that you had. You can pick the residence of your husband's voting residence, or you can pick the current location to vote locally. And those are your options as a voter, as a spouse, or now a civilian.
And Lisa, what about if Rebecca had made that transition out of active duty and not become an active duty spouse right away? If for example, her spouse had not been active duty and she had gone from active duty to veteran status without an ongoing connection to the military, what about that transition? Because you yourself, like you said, have gone through that transition.
Yes.
What was it like? How well was it communicated?
Oh, so fortunately, as a veteran, you go to several of the out briefings, and usually voting is part of an out briefing status there. So you can become familiar with how to vote locally. If you were going to vote locally, then you would just simply go down to your local DMV, Department of Motor Vehicles, where you would register your vehicle, and you can register to vote there, where you receive a voter registration card and also a polling station that you would go and cast your vote when you're ready to vote during any of the elections. it's more simple than you a Kava voter having to fill out forms and send them forward and be very conscious of dates. It's a little bit more simplified, just having to go down to the local polling station. Did that help you, Rebecca?
We got a smiling face, so I think so. Thumbs up. Awesome. Well, those are all the questions that our team has prepared. Again, I want to interject at this pivot point to encourage anyone who's watching this video. If you have ongoing questions, either about your personal situation this year or maybe a past situation where you weren't able to cast a ballot successfully, if you want to ask any of those clarifying questions, now's a great opportunity. You have direct access to these awesome experts. So please put any questions that you have in the comments of this video, and we're going to start asking some of those live questions. And I know we've already got, I think I saw about 3. So I'm going to go ahead and start asking them in order. And then Bessa, Rebecca, y'all can grab some of the other questions too. The first one I saw is very relatable on a personal level. So the question is, I'm a military voter who votes absentee in another state, and I used the regular state form when registering to vote, not the federal postcard application. Did I do it wrong? Great question, Brandy. Clarissa or Lisa, does either of you want to assuage this person's fears?
So Lisa, if I can just add one thing. The federal postcard application guarantees protections for military members and eligible military spouses. One of those protections is the ability to use the backup ballot in the event the official ballot does not arrive on time for the voter to vote it and return it. So even though the voter already submitted a registration, that's okay. We encourage military spouses and military members to submit a new federal postcard application each election cycle. Why, you might ask? Well, ballot requests expire in some states after every election cycle. So even though a voter is already registered and voted, for example, in the 2020 elections, then that doesn't guarantee that their ballot request will remain updated in their election office for them to receive ballots in 2022. That's why we encourage this military voter, Ms. Brandy Jones, to submit a new federal postcard application this year. And all of the information that she or he provided earlier with the voter registration card, it can be copied and pasted into the federal postcard application, signed, dated, and sent to that appropriate election office.
So to clarify, no one's getting in trouble for using a state form, but duplicating with an FPCA is a great assurance level to get extra access to some of those assurances you were mentioning.
Yes, and then ultimately election officials are the ones who process and successfully approve the voting forms that they received. So if there's any issue that comes up with voting documents, then most likely the election office will contact the voter in that event. So we try to encourage voters to have a good relationship with their local election officials so that in case these types of questions come up, voters always feel confident in contacting their trusted sources of election information. And these trusted sources are election officials at their election offices as well as FAP.
All right, I'm going to jump in with the next question. We have a few that have come up here on Facebook. If someone has a question, who do they go to? Voting assistance officer, or should they come to you?
Perfect. So if it's a military persons or their eligible spouses that have access to the base, that would be their chain of command or their first line on the ground person. FFAP.gov is always access. They can access on their computer 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The information is updated always. And we also have communications telephone during regular duty hours, customer service, where they can reach out and get a person on the phone to directly answer any questions that they have. 'Cause, 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 'cause,
Okay, great. I'll jump in with another question here. I always assumed that I had to vote wherever my driver's license was from. Is that true?
No, that is not true. You want to take that question, Clarissa?
You go ahead.
Okay. Usually, service member, they vote where their last residence were or their home of record, and that's usually indicated on their LES where they can vote. So many military members may elect to change their home of record to their new home of residence where they would then vote. So your driver's license does not have to reflect that because many states does not require you to give your driver's license number on the FPCA, but require you to have a social security number where you include, the 9-number digit or the 4-number digit requirement, but that is specified for that state. Not all of them have the same requirement. So when presenting the FPCA, you want to ensure that you take the guidance from the election official's office to prepare your FPCA according to the guidelines to that state.
I'm really glad Kate asked that question because I know I have PCS to places and I've got a local driver's license just for the convenience of having a local driver's license, but I've not intended to switch my residency. And so this is a great clarification. Thank you so much. All right, well, next question that I see in the Facebook comments is this one. It starts with a bit of a story. So this person says, I voted by mail and had my vote rejected because my signature didn't match. The signature on file, I assume. My signature is very inconsistent. Is there any way to deal with this when voting by mail is my only option? A really relevant question. Thank you so much, Carolee, for asking, especially as we've seen some even moving policies regarding signature requirements. So it's definitely a relevant issue we know that folks are facing. Clarissa or Lisa, do either of you have some advice for this person or any sort of extra information?
Yes, I'll add a few things, helpful tips that might help decrease the chances of this happening to military families. So a lot of military members do change their names as a result of, sometimes getting married. And so on the FPCA, there is a section where the voter can indicate their first name, last name, and also any previous names. So that's the first thing. On the FPCA, make sure that that information is included in section 1. The next thing is in section 6, known as the additional comment section. Military members can explain that their signature changed as a result of a name change. And if they remember that what their signature used to look like when they first registered to vote, they could include that signature in the space in section 6. And then another piece of advice or tip is, as a voter gets older, for example, we might not have the same signatures we had when we were 18 and in high school. Most of them have changed. And so, especially with titles, if someone has a doctorate, then their signature might include the doctor in it. So if any additional information can be provided in section 6, that would also help the election officials, will help them likely accept the form without any issues. And ultimately, the signature is required in section 7 of the FPCA form. So even though we do have an online assistant on ff.gov that walks voters through each section of the FPCA, the voter still needs to print that PDF packet completely and provide a wet signature. A lot of individuals, they just forward this FPCA to their election officials if they accept it by email without first signing it. And that can disqualify or invalidate a lot of documents. So making sure that there's at least a signature down below. And the election officials are looking for that, and they should be contacting the voter. But just on the safe side, if that happens, if you're worried about that happening with your signature, after you submit the federal postcard application to your election office, give them a call or send them an email to find out the status of that voting material. And then once you can confirm that your FPCA was successfully processed and that you can expect to receive a ballot, then you can feel a little bit more relieved, I think.
This goes back to what you said earlier, Clarissa. Be voter ready and early is best, because the earlier you send in your ballot, if it does get rejected, whether it's for signature mismatch or some other thing, there's usually a process through states, right, where you can do what's called, you can cure your ballot curing, I think is the term, where you may be able to follow up and fix the problem in time to still get counted. And you want to give yourself enough running room for that to happen if it has to happen. Do I've got that term right?
I haven't heard ballot curing, but it does make sense. And it actually happened to our colleague, Lisa, won't say her name, but she obviously works at the Federal Voting Assistance Program, and she got her ballot, and she was voting in the state where she lived prior, and she sent it without signing it at the very bottom. Well, luckily, this state had a portal where voters can submit their balloting materials. So in her case, she was able to very quickly edit, or rather sign her ballot and then submit it completely, and it was counted. So it happens to the best of us. And just to make sure, we always encourage, if military spouses or service members have access to a voting assistance officer, maybe they can coordinate a time for the voting assistance officer just to quickly glance, review the FPCA, for example, to make sure that everything is filled out correctly, legibly, in black or blue ink, for example, and transmitted in accordance with the state guidelines that Lisa was explaining earlier. And that would be one of the tips of advice, really, to try to start early, and if possible, catch those errors on voting materials quickly, so that if there's a possibility to remedy them, then the voter can take advantage of that. And also, we always have the emergency backup ballot for military members and their eligible spouses. So if needed, and the voter doesn't receive their official ballot, then the voter can send in the FWAB as a backup. And that official form is called the Federal Write-in Absentee Ballot. And that is also available on the website fbap.gov.
Kate would like to know, she's a military spouse, can she vote where she lives, but then pay taxes through her state of residence back home?
Usually all the legalities for voting and questions about taxes and property, we usually defer them to their legal team on the installation for further guidance. We don't want to provide them erroneous information that will cause implications thereafter. So we never try to give that type of information out.
Okay, and this question from Holly. My spouse will not be in the States during the election. How soon should he request an absentee ballot?
I would say Lisa and I have the same response: as soon as possible. The federal postcard application can be sent at any point this year, even if it's way in advance of the primary or the general election. So once the FPCA is successfully processed, then the federal law, the Uniformed and Overseas Citizens Absentee Voting Act, guarantees that the voter will receive an absentee ballot up to 45 days before the election. So that month-and-a-half timeframe won't change, but we can help ensure that the FPCA is processed successfully by submitting the FPCA as soon as possible.
And can I piggyback with one clarification, Clarissa? If the service member doesn't know what their mailing address will be yet, they know they're going to get deployed or TDY'd or something, but they haven't been given the exact, APO to use, what do they do then? Should they fill out the FPCA super early and then send in a second form later when they have the specific mailing address, or should they wait until they have that detail? How would you advise someone who's working with like a tricky evolving information?
Yeah, so PCS does happen at certain times in the year, but it can really happen anywhere. As far as I'm starting to understand the military life cycle that Lisa helps me out with. And so understanding that, we encourage the service member to submit a federal postcard application immediately with the current mailing address, and in Section 5, to select to receive voting materials by email. That way, he or she will receive their ballots in their inboxes without the voting materials going to that old mailing address. And we also encourage service members to refrain from using a .mil address. Why? Well, because not all service members have access to that .mil email on Saturdays and Sundays. And so UOCAVA Saturday in September is usually when election offices start sending out those ballots, because it's that 45-day mark before the November 8th election this year. So we recommend that voters use a generic email address, and they can check their spam folders and junk folders in case that emailed ballot goes to those folders. And then the voter can still submit a new federal postcard application once he or she receives their next APO or mailing address. So the federal postcard application can be used to update any information. So the most important thing is to send in the FPCA as soon as possible, and then later update that information by sending in a new FPCA when there's a new address, for example.
I think it's my turn and I'm slacking on the job over here. Sorry, Sarah. Do you want to take this next one?
Sure thing. So the next question we've got is from Heather, asking, what should I do if I no longer have a local address in the state where I'm a resident? So probably had an address at one point, has since moved, and no longer has access to that address. What does this person do?
Are you okay with taking that one, Lisa?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So if you no longer have a local address in the state where you were a resident and you're now currently overseas, I'm thinking, or outside of that state, you don't have to have ties to that state at all. You just have to have resided in there and voted there once before. You can still use that same address, regardless if the building is gone, no longer exists. It's turned from your residence to a hospital, to a government building. You can still use that address, absolutely, as your local voting address.
That's great.
That's always been one of the major questions that many of our service members and their families ask, because that can be confusing. Once they learn the system, they master it very quickly. And incredibly, how our spouses are all over our election dates and make sure that the FPCAs and FOBs and registration are on point, and getting those service members on point to ensure that they're ready, voters ready for the next election.
To your point, Lisa, I know we had someone, I remember in 2020 reaching out, and they thought they had to use their in-laws address because their in-laws still lived in the district. And so they thought they were still going to need that ongoing access. But of course, that's not the case. They were able to use their own personal address, even if they didn't live there. I will just flag in the comments, the person who asked this question did comment a follow-up clarifying. So it says a local address is required in Florida when filling out voter paperwork. So if I understand correctly, Heather, I think what Lisa and Clarissa are trying to say is you should be able to put the same address information, the local address information that gave you residency at one point in Florida to vote there. Even if you don't have access to that location anymore, that information, the local address information, is still what you would use on the paperwork. And then you would put your mailing address for where the ballot should get sent. Do I have that right?
Correct, because both of those addresses should be different. Your resident address should reflect an address that you're not currently located at, and your mailing address is the address where you want your state ballot to be mailed to, that you're currently residing in.
And that's a great point, Lisa. We've been talking a lot today about the federal postcard application, which is a great form to use if you're voting somewhere where you're not currently living. So maybe this is my bad for skipping past this when we set up at the very beginning. But if you happen to live in the same place where you have residency, where you're a voter, you can actually use regular stuff. You can go to voter.org. You can use regular state registration forms, whatever a civilian would use. If you're a local voter, all of that doesn't change, even if you're military. It's only once the military sends you somewhere else, whether it's somewhere else, CONUS, or somewhere overseas, that's when you become this, Lisa said it earlier, UACAVA voter. You get a fancy long acronym that categorizes you as a special federal voter. And so the FPCA is for you if you're absentee. Regular stuff is for if you're local.
Mm-hmm. Sure, you don't want to be a member of the FAP team, Miss Sarah?
She knows her stuff, right?
Yes.
Well, training her well.
I was going to say, I've been in touch with your team for a few years now. It's rubbed off. You guys have done a fantastic job of explaining everything. So, Rebecca, I think you stuck in the chat that you had a personal experience related to Alaska that made you resonate with the question. Is that right?
It did. I found it to be very confusing because so we're residents of Alaska, and I wanted to vote there, and they were asking for a physical address, and there was a lot of confusion on the phone on both of our ends because the small town in Alaska, and also just my confusion since we didn't have a physical address there anymore. But what they ended up telling us in Alaska was to just use the address that we used to live at. And I said, okay. And so that's what I've been doing. And my voter registration card has that address on there, even though we haven't been there for 10 years, which is strange to me. But hey, it works.
Good. Good to know. Good.
I like that testimonial.
Yes, me too.
Well, we've covered all of the questions that we've been asked. Before Bessa, Rebecca, and I kind of wrap things up, Clarissa and Lisa, are there any other last minute pieces of advice or information that you want to just make sure that we didn't skip before we wrapped up?
Yes, so just 5 things. I know it might be a laundry list, but here we go. It's important information for military voters. So on fvap.gov, we have so many resources and tools for the military community. The first thing I want to point out is that we have a directory of all the contact information for every election office in the United States. So if you're wondering where you send by email or by mail or by fax your voting materials, go to fvap.gov. And in the quick links section, you can find that link that will take you to the directory so that you can find all of the contact information for your election offices. The second thing is that we have a new translate feature. So on fvap.gov, in the top right corner, you can select translate. And this is for any individual who prefers to read voting information in a different language. So in the top right corner, you can select translate, and that will translate the information that we have into any other language. And this is through Google Translate. So if you have questions about those translations, you can reach out to us or you can contact your election officials. But this is a really cool new feature we have available on our website. The third thing is that we have the voting assistance guide electronically. So you can go to ff.gov/guide and then select the state or territory where you vote from. And once you select that state on the map, it will take you to your state pages where you'll find information about the upcoming election deadlines and election dates, as well as the state-specific guidelines and contact information for election officials in that state, as well as a link to the portal where you can find out the status of your voting materials. Around Election Day, one of the most common questions we get is, how can I check if my ballot was counted? Well, we can't tell you that because states, the elections are administered at the state level. So only the portal from your Secretary of State's website can help you find out whether your FPCA or ballot request was successfully processed or if your ballot was counted, for example. But you can find all of that at fvap.gov. Something else that I'd like to share are the availability of calendar alerts. These calendar alerts are available at ff.gov/calendar-alerts. And there you can download and sync notifications for your respective state. So if you vote in the state of Texas or if you vote in the state of Florida, you can sync those notifications so that you'll know, you can sync them with your mobile devices or your desktop devices, and you'll receive an alert when it's time for you to register to vote for a certain election, such as an upcoming primary. And for example, when you must return your ballot so that it is received on time for the general election. So those calendar alerts can prove especially handy, especially if service members are deployed. And then the last thing that we can offer at the Federal Voting Assistance Program is direct assistance. You can go to our contact page and you'll find how to give us a call or email us at vote@ff.gov. And we usually respond within 3 hours, and we are live human beings. We're not robots, we're not bots who are just taking your questions. We invest time in trying to craft responses that will help set you up for success. And in doing so, we are mandated by Congress to provide an email to fax service for UOCAVA voters whose states only accept the ballot by mail and fax. So if you are from a state that requires a faxed ballot, you can instead take a clear scan or a clear picture of your balloting materials and email them to us directly at fax@ff.gov. That's Foxtrot Alpha X-ray at fvap.gov. And a member of our team will take those balloting materials, convert them into a fax, and transmit them to the appropriate election offices. Usually the states that we service with this email to fax service are California, Florida, Oklahoma, Texas in some cases, especially if service members are located in hostile fire zones, as well as Alaska and Louisiana. So again, all of that information is available on ff.gov. And don't forget to follow us on our social media, where we also share updates and key election information. We are on Twitter at FVAP. We are also on Facebook and Instagram, as well as LinkedIn and YouTube.
Thank you, Clarissa. You are a wealth of information. I like how you broke it down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I hope you all caught that. We'll also make sure to keep these resources coming in the comment section and on our websites. And speaking of website, I wanted to share an exciting announcement. This is for military teens. So if you're a military teen, or if you're the parent or the guardian of a military teen, we have a resource that is just for you. So in collaboration with SFI, and NMFA just launched a website to help answer your unique military kid questions and get you so excited for this new opportunity in your lives. You're going to get to vote. We're going to be updating this site with new info throughout the year, and it is militaryteenvoter.com. It has everything you need to know. It's broken down really simply. We're super excited about it, so please check it out.
Thank you so much, Bessa. I'm so glad you were able to join us today. And thank you, Clarissa, for your wrap-up remarks. Lisa, I wanted to give you a chance if you had any last thing you wanted to say.
Perfect. Clarissa just summed it all up. We're just going to close it out with just simply being voter ready. I mean, you can't say it any better than that. Voter ready, and give yourself enough time to do what you need to do to get it done. To participate.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
You're here. That should be our new mantra. Voter ready, all of us.
Voter ready.
Well, thank you both, Clarissa and Lisa. I'm so glad we got to see both of your faces on the screen. That was lovely. You are a wealth of information, as is your entire team. So please send them our gratitude as well. And I just want to thank NMFA and EFM too for helping co-moderate today. This was really great. And to all of the other coalition organizations that helped prepare and promote for this event. It was truly a team effort.
Awesome. What a great event. Thank you for having us.